Hi everyone, welcome back to the Africa by Toto podcast, where the rains are always blessed. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Carissa.
And here on our show, we talk about oral traditions from around the world, specifically from 10,000 BCE to 1500 CE. For today's episode, we'll be taking a closer look at the continent that inspired this podcast. Yup, you guessed it, Africa. As you may know, Africa is the second largest landmass and believed to be the oldest inhabited territory on Earth. It's home to one of the earliest human civilizations, with long-lasting influences and a great number of ethnicities, cultures, and languages. Oral tradition in particular has been known to be a tried and true method of passing down traditions, codes, and values or acceptable behavior. But that's true for most oral traditions around the world, isn't it? And so, this begs the question, what is it that makes African oral tradition different from the rest? And more importantly, what is it that separates African oral tradition from its literary counterpart, which involved the passing down of written sources? The answer lies in its long history.
You see, oral tradition was an important part of African history long before literary tradition came into the picture. While written sources did exist in Africa from 10,000 BCE to 1500 CE, many of them were actually in Arabic, a language most Africans couldn't read or write. They could barely understand what was written, let alone pass it on to the next generation, so it wasn't until around the 20th century that African literary tradition became to be truly developed. That was when South and West African writers decided to publish writings adapted from oral tradition, which managed to withstand the test of time even after thousands of years. Now, despite what everyone says about imitation being the best form of flattery, some writings arguably served as cheap imitations of the original oral sources, so they weren't influential in the least. But there were, however, a handful of African writers who went above and beyond just imitation, instead reflecting the essence of oral tradition in their work. Take Nigerian author Amos Tutuola for instance. Being Yoruba himself, he decided to weave in a personal touch of traditional Yoruba folklore into his work, providing a glimpse into African oral tradition. One of his most famous novels, titled My Life in the Bush of Ghosts, describes the experiences of a boy as he ventured into a bush at the heart of a tropical forest. Throughout the book, he painted vivid descriptions, such as the ethereal sense of awe upon entering the world of ghosts and spirits, and the mix of fear, despair, and excitement when faced with a ghost. Yes, you heard right, a ghost. Unknown to the boy, this bush was the dwelling of all the ghosts in the land. No one had the guts to enter the area, not even in the daytime. In the second chapter, he encountered three ghosts: the golden ghost, the copperish ghost, and the silverish ghost. They beckoned for him to come closer, and when the silverish ghost shone his light on him, the white of his bones grew stark against his skin. Despite the terrible fright it gave him, he chose to approach the silverish ghost instead of the others, causing a fight to break out among the three of them. So fierce the fight was, that even the winds held their breath the whole time, or so the narrator claims. Pretty spooky, huh? Spine-chilling as they may be, these folktales often accurately portrayed the concerns, fears, and beliefs that were so deeply ingrained in African oral tradition. According to the foreword, some folktales in My Life in the Bush of Ghosts were actually stories that African grandmothers used to tell their grandchildren when they were young. How awesome is that? Through this, we can see that most of literary tradition was really just derivative of oral tradition. This isn't to say that written sources weren't important at all, of course, but oral tradition's place and significance in African history can't be denied either. While we can't pinpoint the exact time where oral tradition was first developed without the help of a calendrical system, it's definitely been around for a long time, and here to stay for a longer time to come. Now, enough about its importance. Let's get down to business and talk about the key aspects of African oral tradition.
The first aspect is storytelling. That's to be expected from oral tradition, right? Well, yes and no. African storytelling wasn't just a form of spoken art, but a performance that weaved the essence of human experiences with beautiful mental imagery. Sure, it may have seemed rather simple and unassuming, but the secret weapon lies in its use of metaphors. Take, for example, an oral Bantu riddle which roughly translates to a chief who only sits among thorns. The answer, which means tongue, may seem like a head-scratcher at first, at least until you picture a tongue as a chief and the teeth as thorns, making the riddle come alive in the depths of your imagination. Isn't that just the coolest thing? It's this clever wordplay that brings out the creativity and playfulness of African oral tradition, not just Bantu languages, but other African languages too. Aside from the use of metaphors, storytelling in African oral tradition was also known for having recurring themes. One such theme involved animals or animal tricksters who were supposedly small, crafty creatures with a knack for outwitting and outdoing beasts larger and more powerful than themselves. This can be seen in a book by Alice Werner titled Myths and Legends of the Bantu, which is a collection of Bantu traditions and stories translated to English. Chapter 17, for instance, was about an animal trickster known as the Boer Rabbit. Some interpretations have referred to him as the Hare, since there have been no sightings of rabbits in the history of Africa. But either way, he was definitely a notable symbol of skill and cunning. While animal-themed stories mostly served as entertainment fodder for African audiences, they were also effective tools for teaching lessons about society and human behavior. The best way to get a point across, after all, is through a compelling narrative with compelling characters, and thus, it's through the actions and personalities of these animals that you understand more about human strengths and weaknesses, and what it means to be human. Pretty heavy stuff coming from light-hearted storytelling, don't you think? Not all African stories were the same though. Some were shorter, others were longer, some had morals to be learned, and others were spiritual in nature. African storytelling can be extremely diverse, but we'll make things simpler for you and talk about the three main genres of folklore: folktales, proverbs, and myths. Some of the themes we talked about earlier may have overlapped across these genres, but they were usually quite distinct from one another.
First up, we have folktales. Despite the title of Werner's book, The Adventures of the Boer Rabbit weren't myths or legends, but really folktales instead. These were short stories based on African beliefs and superstitions, offering explanations of natural phenomena or ways to make sense of the world. One such African folktale was titled The Tortoise and the Birds, which explained how tortoises came to have their cracked shells. It may even be a familiar story to you, considering how it's been passed along informally from generations to generations up till today. According to the folktale, there once lived good and kind creatures far above the clouds. All the animals knew that they were there, but didn't know their name, so they referred to them as the Cloud People. One year, a terrible drought spread across the lands, and both the animals of the earth and the birds of the air nearly died of hunger. The Cloud People noticed the state they were in and offered food to those with wings who could fly up to help themselves. A tortoise who wanted to join in despite his lack of wings begged the birds of the air to take him with them. The birds agreed, so they each plucked a feather from their wings and attached them to his feet, giving him the means to fly. When they arrived at the home of the Cloud People, the birds introduced the tortoise as King All of You, a name that meant he represented all of them, the greatest of them all. And so all was well, at least until the Cloud People presented the feast and said, "This is for all of you." The tortoise, upon hearing his new name, greedily ate up most of the food and left only scraps for the rest. Naturally, the birds were furious. They took away the feathers, leaving him with no way to return to Earth as they flew away. The parrot was the last to leave, so the tortoise begged for him to tell his wife to get a soft grass for him to land safely on a big rock. The parrot, who was also angry, told the tortoise's wife to get her rocks and stones instead. When the tortoise jumped down, his once smooth shell shattered to pieces, leaving him with still visible scars on all tortoises to this very day.
Next, let's touch a bit on proverbs, which were quotes and sayings known for their simplicity and brevity. Similar to what we would call a man of few words, proverbs often express important truths and life lessons in just one phrase. Here's one originating from Ethiopia. The fool speaks, the wise man listens. This implies that fools are insecure about the things they know and keep talking because they feel like they need to, whereas wise men are more likely to take in new ideas and rarely feel the need to talk if they can listen. See? So much wisdom in so few words. Moving on to our last type of folklore, myths. These were stories too, but unlike folktales, myths were largely religious and spiritual in nature. They often involve deities, spirits, or supernatural beings, such as the Mami Wata, a water deity described to be a mermaid-like figure. In general, however, many African myths suggested that heaven was created before earth, and man was created before animals. The earth, then, was often regarded as a mother goddess who ruled over everyone and gave life to new generations, and no one could live without her. These myths eventually became the foundation for many cultural and spiritual beliefs across Africa. So, three main genres of folklore, with varied uses of metaphors and different recurring themes. Storytelling wasn't just an individual experience, it involved families and communities, and even societies. These stories were told in households, in performances, and even in front of audiences around a central fire. Wait, what? A fire? What does that have to do with anything? That's right, we've only covered one aspect of African oral tradition thus far, haven't we? We've yet to talk about what was arguably the most interesting aspect, its delivery.
Just as storytelling was important to African oral tradition, music had an equally big part to play too. Music and dance were traditionally used in ceremonies and rituals to pass on stories from generation to generation, and just, well, regular singing and dancing. Oral tradition in particular often relied a lot on singing and body movements. By controlling the quality of a singer's voice and the fluid motions of their body, they could sway the audience's emotions with ease. The best part of any story, after all, is the drama of performance. Now, time to make some noise. In order to play music, you need the right instruments. In order to play African music, you need instruments such as the djembe drum, ngoni, kora, and balafon. The djembe drum was especially important in performances to complement dance movements. Here, have a listen. As cool as it sounds, many Africans believe that certain instruments were home to spirits that helped them with healing rituals and seasonal ceremonies, and yeah, that included the djembe drum. It was said that the djembe drum was a point of energy to connect tribe members together, causing people to break out in dance. What makes a dance, you may ask? Well, during performances, it was usually the clapping of hands and stomping of feet, keeping up a steady rhythm with singing voices and musical instruments in the background. Who knew African oral tradition could sound so fun?
With that, we've come to the end of today's episode. After exploring the significance of African oral tradition and what makes it so unique, perhaps the most valuable thing we've learned is the way they unify all the African communities. In a single tribe, you probably would have listened to the same folktales, proverbs, and myths as a child, and you probably would have been a part of the performances and ceremonies growing up. Maybe you were even a performer yourself. As for you, fellow listener, we hope this has been an informative and thought-provoking session. Perhaps you have gained some new insights into African oral tradition that you didn't know before, or learned something interesting from the time period of 10,000 BCE to 1500 CE. And with awareness, hopefully, comes a sense of appreciation. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Carissa.
And we thank you for listening to the Africa by Toto podcast.